Hey everybody, hope you're all doing wonderfully well. Before we get started on this week's video, I just wanted to say thank you to so many of you for reaching out on LinkedIn, for reaching out by email and by phone to check in on me, to see how I'm doing. The short answer is I'm doing better. I'm not perfect. I suspect never will be perfect, but through my being able to talk to friends who reached out, being able to talk to my friends that I've already mentioned, speaking with my therapist a couple of times, I've got a plan. I'm armed with some additional tools that I didn't have before, and absolutely starting to feel better. Maddie seems to be doing fantastically well at Michigan, so it's all smiles, it's all getting better. But beyond anything else, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your concern and your empathy and your kindness. It means more than you can begin to know. This week's video is going to be a little bit of a turn from what we talked about last week. Listen, we've all continued to see the increased attention paid to issues surrounding harassment and retaliation and discrimination in the workplace. And I don't anticipate that's going to slow down anytime soon. Again, given the executive orders, given the Department of Justice announcements and memoranda, given the EEOC's ongoing approaches to issues that are different than they have been in the past, we're going to continue to see attention paid to workplace claims, whether it's harassment, whether it's retaliation, whether it's discrimination. And as a result of these internal complaints that we continue to get, what we're seeing is the absolute necessity of organizations appreciating what their obligations look like with regard to internal investigations. What I want to talk about today specifically are 8 different scenarios that can arise inside of your workplace where we need to understand from a leadership standpoint, from an HR standpoint, that we have an obligation to conduct an investigation. We appreciate when we get complaints, protected complaints, complaints of a hostile work environment, complaints of discrimination, complaints of unfair or differential treatment based on somebody's membership in a protected class. These are protected complaints. These are complaints upon which investigations must be conducted. The legal obligation exists, and we need to ensure that we as leaders, that we as HR professionals can recognize when these complaints are made so that the investigations can happen. And where I want to start is just by making clear to leaders, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, I don't mean this in a derogatory or an insulting way, but you do not conduct investigations. Your obligation with regard to when a complaint comes to you or you know of a situation which may require an investigation is immediately to report it to human resources. And there's a few reasons you're not the one who's going to be conducting the investigation. Reason 1, you don't know how. Why on earth would you know how to conduct an investigation into allegations of inappropriate workplace conduct? Do you know who to talk to first? Okay, so you talk to the complainant first. Well, now we have a decision point. Do you talk to the accused immediately thereafter, or do you talk to other witnesses to try and uncover additional evidence before you talk to the accused? You know who to talk to first, who to talk to second, who not to talk to? What kind of questions should be asked? What kind of questions cannot be asked? What kind of disclaimers can, should, must be made at the outset of an investigation? What kind of disclaimers, as a matter of law, cannot be made at the outset of an investigation? What are you going to do about privilege? What are you going to do about confidentiality? What are you going to do about the summary of the investigation? Why would you know how to do any of that? That is not what you are trained to do. It is precisely what your HR folks, what your people team are trained to do. Second reason you do not conduct the investigation is if it's someone who has raised the allegation and it's someone with whom you work, you are perceived as having a stake in the outcome. Whether you do or you don't, doesn't really matter all that much, because that's the perception. And the third reason, oh, by the way, if it's somebody with whom you work closely, you may be a witness. And as I am sure we all can appreciate, you cannot be witness and investigator at the same time. So from a leadership standpoint, our obligation when we confront any of these scenarios that I'm going to describe is to ensure that it gets to HR, because in each of these scenarios that I described, the investigation responsibility exists. The first one is, and this is the easiest, where an employee brings a complaint directly to human resources. If it is a protected complaint again of harassment, of discrimination, of retaliation, of unfair working conditions, or unfair treatment based on somebody's membership in a protected class, the investigation obligation, obviously, in those kinds of situations exists. The second, it's when the employee comes directly to the manager, himself, herself, or themselves, raising the complaint, saying, I've been harassed, saying I'm being treated differently as a result of my national origin or my sexual orientation or my differing ability. Obviously, when you as a leader receive a complaint of that nature, it is your obligation immediately to report it to HR so it can be investigated. Now, what about the scenario where the employee comes to you and just unloads and says to you, here's my complaint of harassment, here are all the inappropriate things to which I've been subjected, but listen, I don't want you to do anything about it. I'm just telling you as a friend, I need you to keep this off the record. As a leader, what do we do under those circumstances? Well, first of all, off the record, right. So that's not a thing. As a leader, as an HR professional, you are on the record at all times. What this employee has just said to you, most likely unknowingly, is they don't want you to comply with what are your legal obligations. So as a leader, do you go behind the employee's back and go to HR? It's not what I would do. I would stand up right in front of the employee and say to the employee, look, based on the conversation we just had, I don't have a choice. I have to go talk to human resources about this. Now, I very much would like for you to be a part of that conversation, but please appreciate whether you're there with me or not, I have to have that conversation. Now, full disclosure, the employee may not be loving on you very much right now, but you have complied with what are your crystal clear legal responsibilities. So we've got a complaint directly to HR. We've got the allegations raised to the manager, to the supervisor, even if the employee says, I don't want you to do anything with this information. Third, where an employee comes to you as a leader or comes to HR and says, I have a complaint about information that I heard from a coworker. And very often, leaders or HR will say, well, that's hearsay. I don't have to do anything about it. First of all, that's not hearsay. Hearsay is defined as an out-of-court statement made for the truth of the matter asserted. That's not hearsay. It's rumor, potentially. It's more likely secondhand information. But if this employee comes to you and says, one of my colleagues, one of my coworkers has complained to me, as a leader, why would you not forward that to HR? As HR, why would you not look into that? You know, I joke during the course of trainings all the time, like outside of my family, outside of my close friends, outside of my Philadelphia sports teams, outside of my dog, Jojo Rollins, Iverson Cohen, there's one thing I love more than anything else, and that thing is sleep. And I'm really not particularly good at it, but when I do it, I really seem to enjoy it. I never want my job to cause me to lose something I love. So when you get this complaint from an employee based on a coworker's complaint and you do nothing, and it turns out the coworker's complaint was real and meaningful and had merit behind it, and 6 months down the road, you get a call from HR saying to you, where have you been? We know that you knew about this 6 months ago, and we now know that you did nothing about it. And now we're in a pretty significant position of peril. From a legal standpoint, potentially from an employee relations standpoint, we have to be defensive and reactive. Whereas if you had just reported it to HR, we could have been more strategic. We could have been more proactive. So even if the complaint comes to you as a leader, comes to you as HR from an employee based on the allegations of a different employee, we still have this obligation to investigate. 4, where we get an anonymous complaint that's capable of investigation. A lot of organizations have confidential hotlines. Other organizations provide methods by which employees can raise anonymous complaints. Sometimes we just get complaints from an unknown email or a created or made up email. with a complaint. And the question comes down to, is there enough information in the complaint that enables us or will allow us to conduct the investigation? One of the situations where I think almost always it's capable of investigation is where the allegations relate to something that happened in a public forum. Your organization has a town hall, or there's a department meeting or a team meeting, and inappropriate conduct takes place during the course of that town hall or department meeting or team meeting. Well, it probably doesn't matter who raised the complaint, because there are a number of people who were present at the time that the alleged thing occurred. So if the complaint, even if it's anonymous, is capable of investigation, we have a legal obligation to investigate. Where constructive discharge allegations are raised, where an employee on their way out the door raises to you, even if it is now for the first time, that the reason that they're resigning is because the working conditions have become so utterly intolerable that a reasonable person under those circumstances would feel no choice but to resign. When we get those kinds of constructive discharge allegations because of a harassment issue, because of a discrimination or retaliation issue, similarly, we have a legal obligation to investigate. Where a complaint has been raised for the first time during an involuntary termination, kind of the same situation. And the fact that the employee didn't raise it during the course of their employment, whether it's based on a resignation, a constructive discharge allegation, or an involuntary termination, it doesn't matter. The obligation still exists, notwithstanding the fact they're giving you this complaint and providing you with this information on their way out the door. Number 7, where a complaint or a charge is filed with an administrative agency. So for example, an employee has not raised to you during the course of their employment the fact that they feel like they were being subjected to a hostile work environment based on race. And then they file a complaint with your administrative agency in the state, or a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And this is the first time you learn about the fact that this now former employee feels that they were treated differently and worse because of their race. We have a legal obligation to investigate that. Now, might it become a little bit complicated because you don't have access to the person who is now your former employee? Yes, but there's still an obligation to try and conduct that investigation, including by reaching out to that employee or to that lawyer, to that former employee's counsel, to see if we can conduct an interview. And finally, number 8, where we have, as managers, as leaders, as HR professionals, either active knowledge, actual knowledge, or constructive knowledge of a possible wrong based on somebody's membership in a protected class. So if we see things happening, if we hear about things happening that we think is related to somebody's membership in a protected class, that we think could rise to the level of a hostile work environment or discrimination or retaliation, even though we didn't get it from anybody directly, under any circumstances, if we have actual or constructive knowledge of a possible wrong based on somebody's membership in a protected class, we have the obligation to investigate. For me, those are the top 8 situations that arise where this investigation obligation kicks in immediately. And we know once we have that investigation obligation, we have to conduct a prompt, thorough, and fair investigation. Who conducts that investigation is a separate question. How it proceeds, separate question. What I wanted to talk about today, and what we've just discussed, are these situations which clearly give rise to the investigation obligation. Thanks so much, folks. Really, as always, appreciate your taking the time to watch, appreciate your commenting, appreciate your sharing. Hope to see you real soon.